tour guide by vocation, and I live in Israel. I live in Haifa. And so you might rightly wonder, what is it that brings me to the topic at hand, which is Judaism and astrology? And the short answer is that about 3 years ago, I was in India when a friend recommended that I check out a book called The Greatness of Saturn by Dr. Robert Svoboda, because they were concerned that over the past few years I had a string of bad luck, and they thought maybe I should read about Saturn to see if maybe the planet's malign impacts were behind all of my mishaps. As someone myself who did his PhD in India, I lived in India for 4 years. I was familiar with Jyotisha or Indian astrology and actually quite fascinated by the book. I couldn't believe my good fortune when, through the help of the same friend, I was offered the opportunity to have my Vedic astrology chart calculated and interpreted by the author of the book, Dr. Svoboda himself. And without going into what was divine, because that's a whole other story, from my chart, I found the whole experience fascinating. And it made me begin to wonder, to what extent was this inquiry that I was on compatible with the Jewish teachings which I was raised on? And so this talk is my attempt to try to answer that question. But let's start first with the time-honored practice of defining our terms. What is the definition of astrology? How do we define it? Astrology is seen as a belief system that suggests a relationship between the positions and the movements of the celestial bodies, such as stars, planets, and the moon, and events and experiences that occur in human life. Put differently, it is the assumption that the stars or planets possess or impart meaning. Some societies, such as India, give great credence to astrology. A good example of this is when India declared independence. The British, when they decided to leave India, unilaterally announced that they would depart India on August 15th. This is in 1946, 47. However, Indian astrologers looked at the charts and said that it would be an infortuitous day to declare independence. In fact, in the city of Benares, Varanasi, the astrologers declared that it would be better advised to tolerate the British one more day longer than to risk eternal damnation. And their charts indicated that declaring independence on that day, which was under the influence of Capricorn, Saturn, and the inauspicious shadow planet Rahu, that only disasters would follow from this. Meanwhile, back in Delhi, the politicians were wondering, what do we do? They were at an impasse. After they decried hundreds of years of British rule, Indians could not now say that they were going to wait until the stars were perfectly aligned before they declared independence. And so the result was an innovative approach to the issue, which was to declare independence exactly at midnight, so that it was technically from the 15th of August, but it was actually on the 16th as well. So it was in between, it wasn't either day, and that way they got away from this issue. Today in the West, astrology is a huge industry, worth billions of dollars. And while Jews may take an interest in astrology and horoscopes, the general sense among observant Jews is that the Jewish religion frowns upon it. In fact, it could be said that all three of the monotheistic religions perceive astrology as an ancient pagan tradition. It's frowned upon in Jewish and Christian religious circles, and explicitly haram or forbidden in Islam, based on the Quranic verse in chapter 5, verse 90. In traditional Jewish thought, there is even an axiom from the Talmud which specifically negates astrology. It says, Ein mazal le'Israel. There is no mazal in Israel, which translated means that Jews are immune to the impacts of astrology or constellations. And yet, there are numerous examples attributed to astrology in the Jewish canon, as we will discuss today. These can be found in the Torah, in the prophets or Nevi'im, and most commonly in the Talmudic period. Based on the numerous stories in the Jewish canon, it seems clear that in the past, belief in astrology was a widely held belief in the Jewish world. Let me give you a quick example. According to the Midrash, Pharaoh's astrologers predicted that a liberator would be born among the Jews. This is from Midrash Shmot Rabbah. And a liberator is indeed born among the Jews. They predict that he will die by water, and he does die due to water. So Pharaoh orders all the babies born that day, Jew and Egyptian, to be drowned. Moses wasn't drowned on that day, but he does end up dying due to water. And by that I mean his sin of striking a stone, which gushed forth water, which is the sin of Mei Merivah in Numbers 20. Similarly, in Exodus 10:10, it says, Ra'u ki raha neged panechem. In English, the whole verse is, and he, Pharaoh, said unto them, let the Lord be so with you, as I will let you go, and your little ones. Look for it for evil. Raha, for evil is before you. This is the King James Version. According to Rashi, Raha does not mean evil here. The word in Hebrew for Ra is evil, but here it's Raha. He says it actually is the name of a bad star. And a bad star is a disaster. Something bad will happen that forebodes evil for their journey into the desert. And as an interesting aside, as I already mentioned, perhaps this is connected to Indian astrology, where we have the shadow planet Raha, which is in the Vedic tradition. It's a malefic influence that brings sudden changes and disruptions, and why the Indian astrologers wanted to push the Day of Independence. Of course, the most obvious indication of astrological influence comes already in Genesis 1, verse 14 and 1, verse 16. And we have the verses here as it says, and God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And 1:16, God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. According to the Ramban, Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, these verses imply that the sun, moon, and the stars acted as signs and did have some dominion or governance over people. It says they govern the day and they govern the night. Similarly, we see in Jeremiah 10, verse 2, that signs are in the sky and can be meaningful to the nations. The prophet states, do not learn the ways of the nations or be terrified by signs in the heaven. Why would they be terrified if it didn't exist? So clearly people thought that there was something going on here, though the nations are terrified by them. And if we go to the other end of the canon, and we go to the book of Amos, we can see on the left the New English version of the more modern translation of the Bible, where Amos 5, chapter 5, verse 26 says, you have lifted up the shrine of your king, the pedestal of your idols, the star of your God, which you made for yourselves. But that's not what it says in Hebrew. If you read the original in Hebrew, I quoted it up here in Hebrew, V'nasetem et sikut malkechem ve'et kiyun tzalmechem kochav Elohechem asher asitem lachem, which should be translated as you have lifted up Sikut, your king, and Kiyun, your idol, the star of your God, which you made for yourself. As we know from Ugaritic texts that were found at Ebla, cuneiform texts, Sikut is the constellation Sirius, and Kiyun is Saturn. So clearly you're talking about stars and their influence and belief in this. Similarly, in the book of Kings 2, King Menashe is described as being involved in divination and witchcraft, and that this is what ultimately led to the downfall of Judah. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshiped them, it says in 2 Kings 21, verse 3. And also Menashe, king of Judah, has committed these detestable sins of star worship. Let me give you some more biblical prohibitions. This is straight out of the Tanakh, and this is actually out of the Torah itself. The first verse is, do not eat any meat with the blood still in it. Do not practice divination or seek omens. It seems very clear-cut that astrology would fit under this category. And when you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly array, do not be enticed into bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has apportioned to all the nations under heaven. Another example of a strict prohibition. And as it says here, let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. And anyone who does these things is called Akum. So divination is something which is really not meant for the Jewish people. And it indicates that these practices were common and that there was even a name for the people who did these sort of things. They were called Akum, which is an acronym for the Hebrew Ovdei Kochavim Umazalot, which literally means those who worship stars and constellations. It's meant as an epithet for pagans, and it's still used as an epithet to this day. And it also sounds like the Hebrew word akum, spelled with a kuf, which means crooked. In other words, there's something wrong with them. They're crooked people because they do this. It's meant to drive the point home here. Let's use a couple more examples. Isaiah mocks the astrologers. He says in chapter 47, all the counsel you have received has only worn you out. Let your astrologers come forward, those stargazers who make predictions month by month. Let them save you from what is coming upon you. So he's scorning these astrologers and saying, good luck with that. Let them work for you. Let's see if they can save you from what is coming upon you. But now we have a question which is a little bit strange. Why is it, if this is so obvious and clear in the Torah, in the Nevi'im and Ketuvim, that we find many synagogues, a good number of synagogues that have been uncovered through archaeology in Israel with mosaics of zodiac wheels that are written in Hebrew? These are clearly written in Hebrew. In fact, there are no fewer than 8 synagogues that we know of that have these mazalot, these constellations, these horoscope signs. All of them are from Talmudic times, meaning from the 6th century or the late Byzantine era. And you have a list here on the right of the mosaics. The previous ones that I showed, I'll go back a second. The previous ones are from Hamat, Tveria, and Beit Alpha. And this one is from Tzipori or Sepphoris. But you can see a list of all the places. Some of them were very partial, but were clearly astrology signs. But several of them have been found almost complete, and they follow a similar pattern, and they appear in a synagogue. So how do we explain this? To understand this, we have to go back to the Talmudic period, and I want to start with the story of Rabbi Akiva's daughter. The story goes as such. When Rabbi Akiva's daughter was born, a Chaldean, which means an astrologer, that was what in Talmud, when they said Chaldean, they meant astrologer, warned Rabbi Akiva that his daughter would die on her wedding day. In order to not unnecessarily worry his daughter, he chose not to tell her, but obviously was concerned and overjoyed when he saw her on the morning after the wedding. She told him that at night she had taken a pin out of her hair and stuck it in the mud brick wall, and that in the morning when she pulled out the pin, she realized that it had entered the eye of a poisonous snake and had killed it. So unwittingly, she had killed the snake that was in her room that might have killed her. And it's by sticking this needle in the eye of the snake. And when Rabbi Akiva asked her what she had done the night of the wedding, she recalled hearing a soft tap on the door and greeting a poor hungry beggar there. So she gave the beggar her wedding meal, her own wedding meal. Rabbi Akiva immediately understood that this mitzvah or good deed that she had done had altered her destiny. As it says in the book of Proverbs 10, chapter 10, verse 2, ill-gotten treasures have no lasting value, but righteousness or tzedakah delivers from death. Based on this story, it seems certain that Rabbi Akiva believed in the possibility that the astrologer's prediction would come true. So we're speaking about a man who is universally considered to be one of the greatest rabbis who ever lived in the history of the Jewish people. So what do we have here? Let's look at some more Talmudic tales of astrology. Rabbi Akiva's daughter is just one story, but there are numerous other examples. For example, in Tractate Shabbat, page 129b, an astrologer predicts that Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak would become a thief. To prevent this fate, his mother never let Rabbi Nachman go anywhere without a head covering and reminded him constantly to pray for divine assistance. Clearly, she believed that this would happen, and so he needed the protection of the kippah and to constantly be praying. In Tractate Psachim 113b, Rabbi Yossi discusses how certain plants and metals are under the influence of specific stars, such as barley, which is said to grow well under the influence of the planet Mercury, showing how astrology was used to explain natural phenomena and agricultural success. In Tractate Brachot 32b, there's a narrative about Rabbi Akiva when he prays for rain. When his prayer is not immediately answered, another sage, Rabbi Eliezer, points out to Rabbi Akiva that the timing of his prayers can be influenced by the position of the stars, demonstrating that the belief in the astrological timing affecting outcomes. And in Tractate Brachos, Rabbi Yosef, who was nicknamed Sinai because of his vast Torah knowledge, was an Amora who was told by a Chaldean that if he took the position of the head of a yeshiva, he would only be the head of that yeshiva for no more than 2 years. So he refused the post for many years. Obviously, he believed the Chaldean. He didn't want to take any chances. And eventually he did take the position of the famed yeshiva in Pumbedita, which is present-day Fallujah. And he died after 2 years. This is just a partial selection. We have other numerous biblical stories and exegesis. For example, biblical stories are reinterpreted using astrology. For example, Joseph's dream with the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to him. That's an example of something which is then discussed in the Talmud with relation to stars and astrology. Or the case of Abraham, who foresaw that he would not have children. So God had him look up at the sky and promised to move around the stars so that he would have children as many as the stars. This is from a Talmudic story that God moved the stars around. And this is directly from Genesis chapter 15, where he tells him to look and count the stars. If you can count them, so shall your offspring be. Okay, now that we have this baseline of examples, we have many examples. Obviously, Jews did at some point practice, believe astrology. So what do we have here? Now that we have this baseline, let's look more closely at the practices themselves and the Jewish approach to these practices. Most people have heard the phrase mazal tov, which depending on the context can mean congratulations, or it can mean good luck. But the Talmud talks about another distinction, which is mazal yom or mazal sha'ah, which roughly translates, can be understood as your day fortune or your time fortune. So what is mazal and what is the root of the word mazal? Rabbi David Kimchi, known as the Radak, claimed that mazal, which means today luck, but also in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, it also means constellation. Mazalot bashamayim are constellations in the sky, is from the root to flow, since the stars and planets flow in the sky. Like the Hebrew word liquid is nozel, nozlim are liquids in Hebrew. So the Talmud speaks of how every day is ruled by another planet. It's not really focused on the zodiac in the sense of the sun sign that we think of it as, like Aries and Capricorn and Gemini and all those things, but rather based on the days and the hours. For example, Sunday is a day that is ruled by the sun. Monday, ruled by the moon. It's a moon day. So as it says in Tractate Shabbat 156b, A debate arises regarding the significance of the hour and the day in which a person is born, attributing certain character traits and destinies to different times. This attribution of destinies and character traits to specific times is a classic example of a horoscope. Why horoscope? Because the word horoscope comes from horo, which means hour. So it was based on the hours that you were born that determined your luck, your mazal. And the term mazal tov originated actually as a blessing to pregnant women, saying basically, may your child be born at a good hour. So may when you have your child finally, may they be born at the right good hour. And this is discussed in the book Sefer Hasidim from the 12th, 13th century, because the hour of the person is born is important because each hour is ruled by one of the seven stars based on Sefer HaBriot. And what do we mean by this? So, as I said, more important than the day of your birth is the hour of your birth, and it forms your personality or character and your destiny and your morality. So, to give you a sense of this concept, here's an example from a Jewish work that looked at the hours of planetary succession, starting with the sun, Shemesh. If you're born in this hour of the sun, you will be a person who shines. And if you're born in the hour of the moon, Yareach, you will be, since the moon encroaches on the sun and can be seen during the day, you'll suffer hardship and ruin because the moon gets smaller and you'll end up suffering in your life. So you don't want to be born in the hour of the moon. Mercury, Kochav, is the secretary of the sun. That means you'll have a good memory. And you're lucky because you exist close to the sun. Venus, Noga, means you're a bright star, and that equals being also a rich person. It is a fiery planet, hence those born in this hour will be promiscuous and lascivious. Mars, Ma'adim, spiller of blood, can punish and kill. Jupiter, Tzedek in Hebrew, means you'll be a tzaddik, a righteous person. And Shabtai, Saturn, is one whose plans come to naught, which brings us back to why they gave me that book to read when I was in India and how all of this study began. All right. So why isn't astrology as important today in Judaism as it is, for example, in Hinduism? And the answer goes back to the 12th century when there's a backlash led by led by Maimonides or Rambam. He was a student of Aristotle and a rationalist, and perhaps astrology was so prevalent in the Talmud because astrology originates in Mesopotamia. That's where the word Chaldean comes from, and it becomes a byword for astrologer in Jewish texts. But as the Jews moved away from Babylonia and away from India, then it became more philosophical and logical in some ways. And the Rambam didn't appreciate astrology, and he brought his formidable intellect to quash the whole practice. In fact, he writes a letter to the Jewish community of Marseille, and he argues that astrology runs counter to Jewish tradition. He states, "Kol divrei achozim bekochavim harei sheker hem etzel kol baalei mada." All the pronouncements of stargazers are recognized by people of science as lies. But he has to account for the Talmudic use of this. And so he says, well, it existed in the Talmud, but it was a solitary opinion, which clearly it was not. And he says stars have no agency, no bchira, free will, or governance, shilton, which we mentioned earlier, over humans. So what is the problem with astrology? Let's look at the problems. There are four major problems from a Jewish perspective, and we'll address each one after the other to try to understand how these problems were not problems during the Talmudic period. The first one is stargazing is a type of idol worship. We mentioned already, Ovdei Kochavim, Akum. The second one is the question of free will. If the stars are determining all this stuff, where is your free will? The third is, isn't then astrology just a form of prophecy? And what does that mean in terms of who has prophecy and who doesn't? And the last one is the question of reward and punishment. If everything's already written, how can you get any reward for doing good things? And why should you be punished for doing bad things? Let's tackle each one by one. Is stargazing a form of idolatry? Technically speaking, worshiping the stars is not astrology, but astrology. There's a separate word for that. If you worship stars as gods, you're an astrologer, not an astrologist. In Jewish tradition, I mentioned already akum, that refers to idolaters who worship the stars, the Ovdei Kochavim Umazalot. And you wonder if it appears in the Talmud, it must have existed during the time of the Talmudic rabbis. And the reality is that it didn't exist then. It exists today in the Talmud, but we know now that it was inserted in the 16th century in the first printing of the Talmud. So the word akum didn't exist and wasn't a concept in Talmudic times. But an astrologer can argue easily that this was never a real concern, because what happens when you think that the stars are doing everything is, or worshiping the stars, is you're confusing correlation with causality. If you get sunburned, the sun impacts you, but it has no choice in the matter. Like the sun, the stars have no control in the matter. They don't control the situation. They were created by God and they do what they do. Another way to think about it is like a clock. It notes time, but it doesn't produce time. The clock is noting the time, but it doesn't make the time. In short, the stars have no agency or free will. At best, they're simply reflecting God's will. And since Jewish tradition is obviously opposed to idol worship, Talmudic rabbis worked on the above principle, and it was never an issue for them. Secondly, predestination versus free will. In Hebrew, the concept of free will is known as bchira chofshit, or the freedom to choose. This is a bedrock of Jewish faith. As it says in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 19, he says, now choose life so that you and your children may live. You have the right to, and the ability as a human being to make choices. You have free will. And as mentioned above, it also said, the people of Israel are not affected by luck or constellations. Ein mazal Israel. Nothing negates your free will to choose and even to change the outcome of your destiny, like we saw in the case of Rabbi Akiva's daughter, although there still is a destiny. You can change it, but there is a destiny. There are two Torah principles at play here, which go one against the other, which is everything is predetermined or foreseen, and there is freedom of choice, as it says in Pirkei Avot, the book of the fathers. And also, there are three things that cancel a harsh decree from heaven: prayer, charity, and repentance, as it says in the Jerusalem Talmud. How about the question of governance? Do they have independent governance, the stars? The answer is no. They don't have independent governance. They have no shilton. And it's interesting that even a skeptic who was so skeptical as Maimonides actually believed that celestial bodies had some form of intellect. They had some knowledge, some intellect there, and even some level of consciousness, because he was following Aristotle, who believed the same things. As such, it was posited that the celestial bodies could comprehend the divine will, but they weren't separate from the divine will. They didn't have the ability to independently force people to act in any way. They didn't have any governance. That said, they may have had an influence, which is why if you were born under Mars, you may have a tendency for blood. And this tendency can and should be addressed by gravitating to a career such as butcher, surgeon, or mohel, ritual circumciser. What about being a type of prophecy? Is an astrology a type of prophecy? This one seems to be problematic because in the Old Testament, there's a very cautious attitude with respect to people who claim to be prophets or having prophetic vision. As it says in Jeremiah chapter 23, this is what the Lord Almighty says: do not listen to what the prophets are prophesying to you. They fill you with false hopes. They speak visions from their own minds, not from the mouth of the Lord. Moreover, there is an inherent fear that people will be led astray by prophets. Take, for example, Deuteronomy chapter 13. It says, if a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, let us go follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer. So how are we meant to resolve this issue of prophecy? Actually, the solution is quite simple. Unlike prophecy, which is a clear message from God and happens precisely as God says, astrology often comes to us in a garbled form. According to Jewish tradition, astrologers can see glimpses of the future, but they can't understand what they're seeing, and they typically can't connect the dots. The good example is what we talked about earlier about Moses, his origin story. The astrologers knew that he would die by water, that they knew that a liberator would be born and that he would die by water, but they did not know whether the liberator would be a Hebrew or an Egyptian. So Pharaoh had all the babies born on that day drowned in the Nile to be on the safe side. The astrologers were right about water, but they were off by 120 years. In the end, Moses died and did not enter the land of Israel because he struck the rock from which water sprang forth, as I mentioned in Numbers 20. In short, we have a difference between predicting and knowing. Rather than discern God's will through divination and stargazing, he instead reveals his will through select people in the form of prophecy. And prophecy is something which is available to select people, not only to Jewish people. As we see, Job, Eov, and Balaam, both had the gift of prophecy, and they were not Jewish. As such, it doesn't present a problem to Jews in the form of false prophets. To the extent that there was such a thing as Jewish divination, we have one clear example of Jewish divination. That divination was not about seeing the future, but a binary choice. The example is the Urim and Tumim, the breastplate of the high priest, which they wore and served as the type of divination because they would turn on and off. So you could ask it yes, no questions, but you couldn't understand what was going to happen. It wasn't prophecy. The last one here is reward and punishment, related to the other ones. What about reward and punishment? According to Jewish tradition, people are rewarded or punished for their deeds in this world. But if everything is foreseen and predetermined, then why bother doing any good? After all, your destiny is in the stars. This would certainly go a long way to explaining why bad things happen to good people, right? Because everything's written and you can't change it. It's in the stars. The answer to this question has already been provided by the previous answers, which is people have free will to choose good over evil and are enjoined to choose good. You have the choice, and God says, choose good. Astrology is not prophecy. Rather, it's the proverbial seeing through a glass darkly, as it says in the book of Corinthians in the Christian Bible, and so should not lead you to change your actions. In short, reward and punishment are not negated by astrology. You are still the master of your destiny. You can always effect moral changes in yourself, and by studying Torah and doing good deeds or mitzvahs, you can override any astrology. However, this begs the question of why then is astrology often correct? And the answer is, unfortunately for most people, their good deeds are less than they think. And for that reason, we see the impacts of mazal on them, of the astrology on them. All right, and we're coming to the end here. The astrology and Judaism can coexist. Based on the above, we see that the belief in astrology is not in opposition to Judaism within limits. This is why it is so common in Talmudic times and is mentioned in many stories. It doesn't mean that Judaism, like Hinduism, encourages astrology. It certainly does not. Rather, it can incorporate astrology without contravening any tenets of the Jewish faith, if you keep what I said in mind. And it has done so in the past. And this brings us back, in fact, to the past and to the zodiac wheels that existed in Talmudic era synagogues. It's one thing to be accepting of astrology and completely another thing to promote it in your Jewish prayer space, as we see in these synagogues from the 6th century. So why is this included in so many synagogue mosaics? Was it just a fad, as some people believe, or was this a way for Jewish communities to compete with the enticing adornments of the churches of those times? Is that what's going on here? Or maybe there was some hidden message in these mosaics. In the mosaics that we have that are extant, we notice always that they're divided into three, and you can see bottom, middle, top on the right side here, into three separate parts. And those separate parts begin at the lowest level, where you see the top left over here, or also here on the bottom, on the right side. You can see that there are biblical scenes right at the entrance to the synagogue, where you have our righteous ancestors. If you can read the Hebrew, it has Yitzchak and Avraham here. This is from Beit Alpha and in Tzipori. It seems to indicate that the good deeds of our ancestors come before us, and they provide merit and atone for our sins. On the second level, as you see on the image on the left side here, on the second level are the earth and the seasons, with a depiction of the god Helios in the middle, surrounded by the constellations or mazalot and the seasons. And the four horses you can see in this image on the left represent earth, air, fire, and water. This is the god that controls the seasons and the forces of nature. In the third and final level, we see the symbols of the synagogue, including the ark, which is the dwelling place of God's Torah. As you can see on the right side here, there's the ark with the curtain, as well as menorahs, shofars, lulavs, and the machta, or sacred ash bin, used for burnt offering. What it seems to be saying that God, that
I think we lost our speaker for a second. So hopefully he can join to give us the conclusion here. Hold on for a moment. If he doesn't rejoin us, I'm going to have to make up the ending here, people. I think I know where he's going with this. I think I do, but while we're waiting, you should all probably check your constellation now, your birth time, please, so you know exactly what you should. But one of you probably has to be a butcher. Probably have to Barry Kenter. You probably have to change your whole career. I don't know, you look like an accountant or a lawyer, but maybe a butcher. I don't know. So hold on. Let's see if I can find our speaker here. Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Are
It
you
was
back?
necessary. I'm
You
back.
were. I was making up the end of your program for you because we were like, oh my God, you were trying to give. Okay, so hold on. Let's get you back. Okay.
Let me
So,
get back to the image.
well, people now have to. I was telling people to go and check their birth time now, and we have to give them the correlation. What they should know about their own characters and
It
see how
says
accurate it is.
sharing is not
Oh, yeah,
allowed.
because I think I have to make you a co-host again. Hold on.
Sorry
I
about
will.
that. We were basically at the last sentence
I
here.
know. Okay. You want to try it again?
Yes, let's
Okay.
try it again now. I'll share
You
again.
left us there, right? Yeah.
I left you with a cliffhanger.
Oh, you did. Okay.
All right, and now we'll go back to here. Can you see it again now?
Yes.
All right, so I'll recap again. The door of the ark is always depicted as closed because we cannot see what is in store for us, even with the constellations and astrology. In short, the mosaics are in the synagogue to announce that God is above all. He is supreme and he is inscrutable. And with that, I just wanted to share my contact information. If you enjoyed the lecture, you want to be in touch with me, you have all my contact information here. And I want to thank you for inviting me to give this talk, and I am open to any questions that you may have.
Okay. Well, let's unshare the screen. I'll give it a moment to unshare the screen. So a few questions. First of all, the Moses story is great. I don't recall that I've heard that one. So I wonder if our audience has heard that. If you have any questions, please, instead of raising your hand, put it in the chat so I can look at the questions. We have limited time. So that was interesting. And I was in India many years ago, and I was like, yeah, I might as well meet with an astrologer. So I found a famous astrologer. I had him, I had him read my future. He asked all those questions: when I was born, what time I was born. And he gave me a very strange reading. And I have to say, it, this was like 1997, and
Uh,
it was pretty accurate. It was pretty, I mean,
wow.
looking back at it, it was pretty accurate. Um,
To be honest with you, I think that the Indian astrology is more accurate than the Western one because it's sidereal, meaning that it looks at where the planets actually are and not just some kind of where they were 2000 years ago and now they're still in the same location supposedly, but they're not. So you're if you're used to a certain sun sign, it may be different under the Vedic one. It more than likely is different because it moves around.
yeah, and did you find, so you had started off with your reading. Did you find it was accurate? Did you find anything useful in it?
Well,
You don't have to go into
unfortunately,
details. You could just say yes or
yeah,
no.
yeah. I'll tell you what, I have about another year until things are supposed to get better for me.
Okay. Okay.
So
Well,
hopefully, I hope it's true.
we're wishing you good mazel. Um,
Thank you.
People want to know that when you shared that Jewish book, the astrological chart, what book was that?
Sefer Hasidim.
Okay, so yeah, you mentioned it. So I just didn't know whether that was where
I
you
think
got the
it's
chart
Sefer
from.
Hasidim is where I got it from. Yeah.
There was a question about, so is this, I mean, you mentioned astrology is pretty strong. It used to be maybe more prevalent, I think, than it is now, but it's still very prevalent. Is it prevalent in Israel?
Um, definitely there are people who are into astrology here. There's a lot of New Age stuff that goes on in Israel. Um, in Israel, in some ways, I think I'm saying this as like a social scientist because everybody's Jewish and you're kind of default is Jewish. If you're not religious, then you might look for spirituality in other places, and Israel is a very safe space to do that in. And so there is a lot of astrology, crystals, yoga, whatever you name it. There's a growing Hare Krishna movement even in Israel. So there's all kinds of stuff, but it's like a Jewish Hare Krishna.
Okay. Um, what's more important in astrology? The symbol you're born under or the time of day you're born?
The time of day.
Wow, that
Yeah.
was okay. Um,
Horoscope. That's like I said,
yeah,
horo is from hour.
yeah, I like
So
that too.
yeah.
Is there a specific book you recommend about astrology that people may want to check out, either about their own, like the hour thing or Judaism and astrology?
I didn't really find books that were Judaism and astrology. What I did was I listened to a bunch of lectures in that I could find online from yeshivas, and they're very much in yeshivish, and I then put them all together and came up with this lecture, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, just really well researched. Thank you for that. Let's talk
There,
about
there is
yeah.
one, there is one guy named Ruben, and I can find it and send it to you if people are interested, who did his master's thesis on Judaism and astrology, which also helped me a great deal.
Okay, yeah, if you could share that, that'd be great. We do a follow-up
Sure.
email. People ask, what happens if they don't know the hour of their birth? Then you won't know.
Well,
I
I'll
mean,
be honest, I'm not an astrologer. I'm just
right.
someone who was interested in astrology.
Right, but I'm saying if you don't know
Yeah,
the hour of your birth, you can't double check to see out of interest how it corresponds to your personality or what you should be doing for a career, maybe.
exactly.
Um, so let's talk about the symbols. So, when I got a little bit into the symbols when I was researching for our Pesach Seder last year. like to do different things. And I think I mentioned to you before we started that I was researching the name Nissan, the origins, and
Hmm.
that's when I mean, I probably knew it, and most of our audience probably knows this. Maybe we should unshare the screen, by the way, so that we can see you.
Okay,
But
stop share.
I was researching Nissan, and then I came to the conclusion, wow, Nissan is not in our Chumash. It may be mentioned somewhere at the end of the Tanakh, but it's not a month. And then it tied into the fact that all of our months that we have are Babylonian. They really tie into Babylonian, Mesopotamian names of the seasons that the rabbis adopted in the Babylonian exile and made them Jewish. They made them
Right.
kosher.
Up until then, I should say that you have Yom Rishon, Yom Shani, the days are first day, second day. It was the same thing with the months. It was first month, second month, third month. So, like, when the Torah talks about the 10th day of the seventh month, that means Yom Kippur, but it doesn't talk about Elul.
Right.
And
Elul is
some
from
of
Elulu, right?
Yes, and Sivan, the Jewish month of Sivan, is probably from Lord Shiva, the
Oh,
Hindu.
okay.
Yeah, probably a
I believe
version of
Tammuz is a god as well. So it's
Tammuz was Dumuzi, and
right.
it was very popular among Canaanites. So there's a site in Haifa which was dedicated to Tammuz.
So I love that our Jewish tradition is filled with the names of months, some of them of other gods that the rabbis put into our tradition and made Jewish, made kosher. I love
Mhm.
that. I also like that if you look at the astrological symbols, to this day, these are symbols that were from Mesopotamia that came through Greco-Roman Jewish tradition and that we as Jews have adopted these symbols. Now, the rabbis take the symbols and kind of play with them a bit. But what's weird is, for example, the symbol for the month for Pesach, right? Is the
Mhm.
ram. It's Aries. And
Right.
so how weird
How
that the
fitting.
ram and how fitting. So my question was always, is that completely, I was going to say random, but random. Um,
Random.
Um, and so it's just amazing. When you dig, when you do an archaeological dig to our tradition, you find it there. The symbols are
Right.
there. The names are there. We just don't. Sometimes we don't think about it. We just say it's Nissan or Nissan is coming. I mean, guys, Nissan's in like is it 2 months? Less than 2 months. We have
Yeah,
Pesach coming.
we
So I
have
want to make sure
Adar
you
and
all
then Nisan.
understand that Nissan is the name what we got from the Mesopotamian world, that the Aries is the ram is from the Mesopotamia. It's all there. It's just kind of embedded. So this astrology that you're teaching us, that you taught us today, is just embedded in our tradition. Um, so it was
we
amazing.
we often don't, we think that Judaism, there's like a traditional original Judaism, but there is no such thing. Judaism has changed over time. It's been influenced by history throughout history, and we're very syncretic. Very few Jews realize to what extent Judaism was impacted by Zoroastrianism. We were under Persian rule for several hundred years, and much of what the rabbis wrote can only really be understood as in contradiction to Zoroastrianism. And the same is true when it comes to astrology or, today with modern philosophy, or we can think about Rambam, who was into Aristotle and incorporated Aristotle into Jewish tradition. So we've always had a syncretic. It was no pure Judaism that some people believe uncritically. Oftentimes, people talk about, oh, when they were practicing the real Judaism. There's no real Judaism. It's always been syncretic and took elements from different places.
And I think that makes Judaism richer if we look at it that way.
I agree.
Someone did note that if you don't know your time of birth, check your birth certificate.
Hmm.
At least in New York, Dina says that the time will be noted there. So, okay, that's
Hmm.
good to know. So, I'm looking at more questions here. I will ask you, what if you could only go to see one mosaic floor in Israel? Let's say you go visit. Our CSP, we have an adventure coming with Jody Magnus in March. I
Okay.
think they're going
So you
to
should
one
go
of
to
these.
Hukuk.
Well, yeah, but
Hukuk is
you
what
can't
that's
Hukok,
what she
yeah,
excavated.
but you can't see anything because
It's all been
she
covered over.
excavated,
Yeah.
it's all covered. So my question is, where's your go-to floor to see the best
I mean,
mosaic?
obviously the three best ones. The best one, the biggest one, though the style is a bit childish, it looks like it was done by someone who was copying somebody else, is the one at Beit Alpha. But it's very large and really impressive and almost complete. And one of the first archaeological sites discovered in Israel. It's in the Jezreel Valley, so you need to be in the area on the way to, Beit Shan or something like that. But it's very impressive, and they have it lit up. It's a national park, and they have it lit up. Hamat Tveria is very nice, but it was damaged in different periods when buildings above it were excavated into the mosaic itself. And that's the same issue that you have in Sipori. It's not as complete, though it's also very impressive and a beautiful mosaic in Sipori. But the best one probably is Beit Alpha.
Okay, so that's your go-to. Um, so there was a question about Mazel Tov. So if we want, if we want to, if you want to tell someone, may your child be born at a good hour,
Hmm.
why did we say Mazel Tov after they're born? We say B'Sha'a Tova, which is to, we try to avoid the evil eye. So if someone says they're pregnant, you say B'Sha'a Tova, which means maybe that's the same thing, B'Sha'a Tova, at a good hour. Is that why
Yeah,
you say
Bishatava
that?
also goes back to the
Okay.
same idea of being at
Okay.
a good hour.
Okay.
But you used to say to a woman, like, when you'd see a pregnant woman, you would say, Mazal Tov, congratulations on being pregnant. But it also meant, may your child be born in a good hour. But Bishatova is exactly that.
Okay.
It's the good hour that you want to. There are better hours and worse hours. Just like there are better days in Judaism and worse day. Like, Tuesday is the best day for a different reason. Tuesday is the best day because in the Torah, God says, and it was good twice on Tuesday. Pa'amayim kitov. So many people want to get married on Tuesdays. So you have
Okay.
better and worse days, better and worse hours in Jewish tradition.
Well, who knew? Maybe maybe some of us knew more than others. I really appreciate the program today. As I mentioned,
Thank you
I
so much.
almost a year ago today, I was looking at this stuff. And when if you come to our minyan in University Park the first Shabbat of each month, Um,
Uh,
we we always say what's going on, what's the origin of the month. So if we're in Shvat, where does it come from?
mhm.
What's the origin of the symbol? How the symbol was interpreted. I actually look at the Greco-Roman stories because I'm reading Percy Jackson with my kids, so there's always some connection to
Okay.
Greco-Roman stories and then how the rabbis interpret the symbols. So I guess people have homework, right? You can
Yeah.
go home, get your birth certificate out, and I'm just unpinning you here. Um, and then I guess they have to find a website maybe that they can check the corresponding hour. I don't know. Is there a specific Jewish approach that's different with regard to the hours, or did Judaism just adopt other
Judaism
traditions?
adopted other traditions here.
Well, okay. Well, I guess what I will say to everybody is B'Sha'ah Tova when you're looking for
Bishatova,
your
yeah.
when you're looking for when you were born, and maybe you're going to discover something very important about you or someone in your family. So check it out. Have a great Shabbat, everybody. It was nice to see you
Thank
all.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the program today, and take care, everybody. Have a great one. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.